Hello and welcome to the fourth LiveG Lookahead on Tuesday the 22nd of November 2022 at 5 PM GMT. Hope you're all good. Just only 1 week left until LiveG's 8th birthday, which will be exciting. So yeah, not long until that. In fact, it kind of coincides almost with our next Lookahead meeting as well. This meeting is being hosted in the LiveG Lookahead channel on our Discord server and is additionally being streamed onto our YouTube channel, where a recording of the meeting will also be available after it is finished. Live subtitles are available by watching the stream via our YouTube channel, and of course questions and input can be given at any time, and we aim to address all questions and input at the end of the meeting if we don't address them during a discussion. We ask that if you're going to contribute, you must respect the LiveG contributors community rules, which can be found under the rules channel on Discord, and as usual, by suggesting ideas, you agree to make those ideas available under the LiveG open source license. So with all that out of the way, we'll introduce ourselves. We'll start with you, Tram Crazy.
Hello again, I'm Tram Crazy. I was not here last week. I forgot that my important work meetings were happening. And so I have done a bit of work on hardware for our G-Shell platform, especially on the desktop side, and I do some cybersecurity stuff and a little bit of coding and quite a bit of documentation for LiveG, and I am a computer science student among lots of other subjects, and I am also very interested in cybersecurity and coding and also kind of network operations generally.
Very good. It looks like it's just me and Tram Crazy, so I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm James, of course, founder and lead developer of LiveG, who's been running this coming up to 8 years now, so very exciting. Not that we're counting or anything. Right, let's have a look at today's agenda. So first up we have planning the hardware for LiveG Proton, with Tram Crazy here, of course. And that's going to be a discussion about how we'll be building the LiveG Proton desktop computer, including details on its tech specs, in addition to how we'll be manufacturing and marketing the device alongside our operating system, LiveG OS. After that, we'll have a report on building multi-platform LiveG OS with me. As we have previously discussed in our first episode, we're building LiveG OS for other platforms, such as the PinePhone and Raspberry Pi computers. We'll be reporting on how we're doing with the status of this development project. And then finally today we'll be discussing about migrating users to open technologies. So with millions of users being worldwide relying on software that runs on closed source platforms to communicate with others and perform their tasks, we'll be taking a look at how we can make migration for users to open technologies a seamless experience with progressive web apps. So then, Tram Crazy, you're up first.
Yep, so we have been, well, a year and a half ago actually, I should be honest with you all here, I started to plan the hardware for our LiveG Proton, which is our desktop G-Shell platform. And we are planning to base at least the first version on a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 because of all of its functionality and versatility. So we are planning to offer all the different RAM configurations of the Compute Module 4, which are 2, 4 and 8 gigs, and I think they might still sell the 1 gig version as well. Obviously the 8 gig version might be something that a lot of people go for just because of that multitasking capability. It's the Compute Module 4 has a Broadcom BCM2711 CPU, which is a quad-core Cortex A72 processor, which, if I remember correctly, runs at about 1.8 gigahertz base. Well, no, 1.8 gigahertz. It doesn't have boosting. I'm thinking of x86. Sorry. And for the storage, we're going to use the light versions of the CM4 because, as we know, as many of you will know, probably James, you know, eMMC storage is very slow, and we want to use a fast NVMe SSD in a PCIe M.2 slot on the Proton board. So that is why we're going to do that, and we were potentially considering using Western Digital Blue M.2 SSD because of their reasonable speeds and high and low prices for the capacities that they offer. So that meant as well that we were thinking we could potentially offer the Proton with like 250 gig, 500 gig, 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte SSD options. But we haven't quite nailed that down yet. We might not want to go with that many configurations, or we might do something like, say, okay, you can get the 8 gig plus 2 terabyte option, the 4 gig plus 1 terabyte, the 2 gig plus 500 gig and the 1 gig plus 250 gig, but people might not want that restriction, so we'll have to see. We'll be using the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth of the CM4. We'll be getting the radio-based versions, and the CM4 has an external antenna port, so we'll then be running a cable and mounting an antenna on the back of the case for superior radio connectivity.
Yeah.
And while wired network connections will be handled by gigabit Ethernet, unless we add a like a 2.5 gig card, but that'll be harder if we're running the SSD off PCIe, so we probably won't do that. And the LiveG Proton will have 2 USB Type A ports, which will only be running at USB 2.0 speeds, and that's unless we add in a USB controller as well over the PCIe bus, which we might well do. So then we would have USB 3. Do you have any thoughts so far, James?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts actually. I think, as you mentioned, it's a good idea to go for the option without the eMMC on board the CM4, definitely, because I think SSD will be much snappier than what you get on board. But in terms of trying to procure one right now for testing purposes, I might either get a 8 gig eMMC one or just a 8 gig non-eMMC one, just for testing. But yeah, for cost reasons, since we're going to be having a SSD on board, I think eMMC we don't really need. And you mentioned about the USB thing. I think it'd be cool to have USB 3, and then on the back of that, maybe we could have a 4-port kind of system, because otherwise you're going to be running out of ports quite quickly when you're plugging in all sorts of things like keyboards and mice, and then say if you want to connect, like, I don't know, USB stick or some other device to your Proton, then it might be a bit hard in that way. So we might be able to afford adding a USB hub with a faster connectivity.
That makes sense. We would just need to run it over the PCIe bus, but that would be perfectly doable. I think so. So we would just need to have, I can't remember quite how PCIe works, especially on circuit boards, whether we would need to run it as have a PCIe switch, one of which goes to the M.2 port and one of which goes to the USB, or not. And obviously we can base the design on the CM4 IO board, but kind of change it. I was thinking perhaps a kind of Mac Mini type form factor might be good for the Proton. What do you
definitely
think? I think that would be a suitable size. I was thinking as well, in terms of cooling, we could put, like, you can get CM4 coolers / heat sinks. We could put like a Noctua 120mm fan in the top so that it's really quiet.
Ooh, yeah. I think that's that sounds good.
With the temperature the CM4 generates is very low, so you could just have the Noctua fan running on a really slow speed, and it would work really well. Even if you had like a full size one in the top, because of the big blades and running at a slow speed, it would be really quiet, and most of the time it could be off anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Think on the CM4.
Yeah, that's a good idea as well.
And obviously CM4 has capability for dual 4K HDMI 2.0, so we'll just break that out to the back, full size, not that micro HDMI nonsense.
Yeah, definitely.
So it can run a single display at 4K 60Hz or 2 displays at 4K 30Hz. And in the future, if GPU support gets better on the CM4, I don't know whether any of you have seen Jeff Geerling's videos about this as well. I know, James, you have. If GPU support gets better on the CM4, there's a very small chance that we might potentially offer a Proton. I haven't run this past you yet. A Proton with a discrete graphics card in a slightly bigger case.
I think that would be pretty cool. Yeah, especially for, like, you know, video editing and stuff. I think we could probably appeal to that market, couldn't we?
Yeah. And powering would be from a 12-volt barrel jack with an external power supply, because otherwise you've got to make your own power supply or try and integrate it in the case, and it all just gets a bit annoying. So just a 12-volt barrel jack would work. I
was thinking about that. We could potentially upgrade to USB-C over the 5-volt connection. It is doable.
It's just that a lot of the PCIe stuff runs at 12 volt.
Yeah. So we'll be tapping quite a bit of power.
But if we had a USB-C power delivery
Yeah.
compatible, USB-C power delivery, I believe, can do up to 20 volts, and it
Ooh.
communicates with the device to decide how much power. And there are little boards you can get with a chip to set the voltage and ampage, and then it will talk to your USB-C power delivery supply to negotiate what voltage it wants.
That's pretty smart. I think that would be a good option. I mean, we'll have to see it like existing kind of implementations to see what else other people have done in terms of that kind of side of things. One thing actually I did write here is, in fact, two things actually. First one is audio, which is quite an interesting one on the CM4 because obviously it doesn't have a headphone jack itself. You kind of have to build out some of the circuitry and stuff. But I was thinking potentially, well, audio output being quite an important one. Just via 3.5mm stereo auxiliary, but also maybe I've been looking into it briefly today. We could implement audio input as well, so you could plug in a microphone and that kind of thing through another auxiliary jack. So you could do things like Zoom calls and other kind of video calling software. I think that'd be nice. If not, then we can just go for USB audio, over USB, which is an alternative.
I know that SparkFun, which you've probably heard of before, they have a power delivery board. So USB-C power delivery can do 5 to 20 volts and up to 100 watts of power depending on the supply.
Oh, flip. Yeah.
So they have a board which you can communicate with over I2C, which we can just put into which we could potentially put in and wire and solder in. And then you can configure it over I2C to tell it what voltage and wattage of power you want delivered.
I think that would be a good option.
We could say to it 12 volt whatever, and then potentially we could also arrange with a power supply manufacturer to get some LiveG branded wall warts.
Yeah. I think that'd be cool.
Power delivery supplies that do like up to the amount we need, but then if we use power delivery, then it's fully in spec. So rather than like doing just straight 12 volt over a USB-C connector, which would fry any other device you plugged it into, it will work suitably. So I think we've got to be careful if we're not using a proprietary connector, we've got to be careful that we stay within standards.
Of course, yeah, and
but it's pretty cool. USB power delivery is a really cool technology.
I think with when you look at kind of EU regulations and stuff which have recently been introduced, I think not only will we be complying with them, but also will make it so much easier for people to be able to connect their existing power supply, the portable power supplies that you get with most laptops these days that run USB-C. I think that would be really good.
I was wondering, James, this is slightly off topic, do you still daily drive a Pixelbook as well as your desktop, or do you not use it as much now that you've got your work MacBook?
I do actually use my Pixelbook still. It is quite old at this point. It's from 2017 or so. But it's still good and runs quite well. I know it will be ending support in 2 years' time, but it still works quite well.
That's cool. Anyway, back to the actual topic now.
One last thing was potentially we can make it somewhat modular. So if we were to introduce kind of complementary hardware, such as I was thinking, one use case could be like a oscilloscope thing, which would connect to the Proton and then let you kind of inspect circuitry and be able to bring up the data on the user interface in the GOS. We could potentially make the kit kind of modular, so you could sit one on top of the other, and maybe it's probably not worth going all the way with pogo pins or anything. You can just use USB cables, but at least we can make it so that things magnetically align with the feet and everything.
It's funny you say pogo pins, because I was just thinking of some kind of proprietary LiveG connector.
Oh dear.
I mean, obviously we love our open source, we don't really want to do that, but I just have this quite fun idea of two boxes sitting on top of each other, that, yeah, almost a bit like, MagSafe.
Yeah.
You know that you have that on your computer, don't you?
Yeah, on
Um,
the work issued laptop. Yeah.
like we could have like some kind of LiveG MagSafe that does, I don't know, it could do like I2C or something
Yeah.
over a MagSafe style connector, which would be a really cool thing to implement, but it would
Or
need a
even
lot of other
USB. I
stuff.
mean, that's
Yeah, it
possible, I
could just be
suppose.
USB, but
Plug and play.
yeah, yeah. I think
One
there are
day.
already magnetic USB implementations, but I feel
Yeah,
like we could do our own better.
we could. Yeah, we probably could make it kind of. I don't know. I think some of them are reversible, but I'm not sure.
It would be really cool to do a modular system so that we have like the protons. You have to have like a base proton, which is your
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah.
You can
Your
just use
compute.
that as a desktop computer. If you're a home user and you want to buy a proton, you can
Mm.
just use it for browsing the web, doing your email,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But then, if you say, we could have like a a box that sits on top that breaks out the GPIO for electronics,
yeah,
so that it's not like there directly for people who don't want to use it, but it kind of connects to some pins somehow that are hidden or magnetic and
yeah,
breaks out
yeah.
the GPIO. Or we could have a box that, as you said, like a oscilloscope or something like that, or a box that, I don't know, we could have like an audio interface that works
Mm.
directly with it, that has the XLR and everything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Or there's just so much potential.
Make
It's
it
really cool.
so, yeah, specialised to different kind of use cases that people will need with the
And we
equipment.
could open up the standard so other people could make boxes that work with Proton.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's always a key one for us to do. To look good as well. It's the right thing to do. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it on the proton side of things for now.
I
I mean,
might, I told you before the stream, I
hmm.
might have to be off now just because I have other things I need to do,
Yeah, no worries.
if that's all
Um,
right. But
yeah,
I will, I will, can always rewatch some of it afterwards if necessary. So,
yeah.
everyone else, that's going to be me off for today. I will probably speak to you all again next week and see you later, James.
Yeah, see you, Tram Crazy. Bye. Okay, moving on to our next topic then. This one's going to be much shorter than the previous topic because, well, there's a lot to talk about with Proton. But in terms of what we've been doing, in terms of LiveGOS's multi-platform support, we've come somewhat far so far. Now, not much has been done to it really, actually, in terms of the development side. But in terms of kind of preparations for it, we're getting quite far. This is something we actually did discuss, I believe, in our first episode of LiveG Lookahead. That would be building out LiveGOS for the Pine phone and the Raspberry Pi, of course. So far, we do have a pull request on the OS Bootstrap repository, which has its own branch where we're implementing a lot of multi-platform stuff. So supporting all the different CPU architectures and all the different device form factors and that kind of stuff. G Shell itself is very much multi-platform in that you can run on both desktop and mobile with their respective interfaces, which is a really good start so far, which kind of already sets it aside from existing desktop environments out there. Because when you look at the Apple ecosystem, you have iOS, and then for the desktop side, you have macOS. For the Google ecosystem, you have Chrome OS and Android. For Microsoft, you have Windows and Windows Mobile, which is no longer a thing. Whereas us, it's LiveGOS and LiveGOS, so that's really nice so far. So yeah, as I said, not much work in terms of actual development side of things has been done mainly due to preparations for LiveG's birthday next week. But we're coming to the end of that, so we'll be able to start work on multi-platform OS development, quite shortly actually. So that'll be good. We're all almost pretty much prepared for LiveG's birthday celebration on the 30th, so that's all good. But in the meantime, we now do have all the kit available to develop on the multi-platform support side. I've got a few Raspberry Pis that I brought over to where I currently am to do some development. So I've got in the corner I've got a Pi 3 and a Pi 4 as well, which is good, and I've got various other devices and things to work on them, such as SD cards and things. I don't have a Pi CM4 yet though. Obviously there's been a bit of a chip shortage, so I've got that currently on my wish list, basically, my radar, to ensure that I can get one fairly shortly, really. And well, as I say, the LiveG Proton we're not going to pre-release for a while, at least to the public. Well, more like sell to the public for a while, because we'll have to have completed LiveG OS really, or at least get into a beta version in order to sell the Proton. Otherwise, we haven't really got much to sell. But yeah, that's pretty good so far with multi-platform support. I think it shouldn't take too long before we have something that is demoable, and yeah, it's something that we'll get started on right away. So that's all good now that we've kind of cleared up all the birthday stuff. As I said, it has been quite a short agenda item, that one, compared to the Proton one, but finally I'm just going to quickly discuss a bit about migrating users to open technologies. So what I mean by open technologies is, well, more precisely, open source software and hardware, which unfortunately a lot of people don't use at the moment, mainly because the leading software and hardware used by thousands, well, millions worldwide actually, the leading software and hardware isn't really open source in some cases. I know you've got things like Android, which for the most part is open source, and quite a few other tools which may also be open source, but a lot of it is commercial stuff, whereas we're not quite as commercial in our ways. We're more kind of open than big tech giants really. So I know you've got Android, which has some open source stuff, unless you're talking about things like the environment that's customized by manufacturers. That's obviously going to be closed source. So it's not just the OS, by the way. Of course, it's with apps as well. There's many apps that are commonly used these days. To list a few, you've got Twitter, you've got Discord, WhatsApp, Snapchat. So mainly communication stuff, as well as Mastodon, which is a recent pop-up, and thankfully that's open source, so that's good. But the good news with them is that seeing that they're commonly used every day, a lot of software developers have made them PWAs as well. So for instance, you got the Twitter for web version, which works pretty much just like the mobile app. In fact, it's almost indistinguishable from the mobile app. Even on mobile interface, Twitter for web still works well. Mastodon also works on the web quite well. In fact, I think that's probably one of its primary targets when it was initially released. Discord does have a web version, which works quite well. I mean, Discord is actually also an Electron app, so no wonder it runs on the web, really. You can access it in the web browser, basically. You've got WhatsApp, which also has WhatsApp web, which you can access on desktop computers, by scanning a QR code on your mobile phone to log in. And more recently, we have Snapchat as well, which has recently released their web version to everyone, thankfully. So technically speaking, you can now use all of those apps I've mentioned on the LiveG Prism and LiveG OS in general, which is quite a good start. So I'm glad that there's a lot of web apps out there already which people can use to basically migrate themselves from existing proprietary software to web software. I know that some apps require another mobile device which must run on iOS or Android to log in order to use the web version. So for example, both WhatsApp and Snapchat require this, so you need the mobile app in order to use them right now, I believe. But I should imagine that's not too much of an issue, considering that, well, when you think about it, a lot of new users might not be using these platforms. They might go to more open platforms, especially if they're going to be choosing LiveG, of course, because at this stage they're likely to be early adopters of our products, and they're going to have an interest in trying to be a bit more open. I mean, in the future, going ahead, I'm sure a lot of big developers will probably target LiveGOS in the future, but that's probably past our early adopter stage, of course. Whereas, existing users right now, to access those kind of apps I've mentioned, which need a mobile device to log into, they'll already have a previous device if they're migrating that they can log into and then forget about, really. I don't think there is much in terms of an expiry date, as long as you continue using the web version every so often of many apps. So that's good, at least, so that people can continue contacting others even if they're not using iOS or Android, which is what we want, basically. That being said, some third-party PWAs, such as that notably for Discord, WhatsApp and Snapchat, may need to be modified slightly on our side, using things like user scripts and user style sheets, because they only run on the desktop right now, and we need to adapt it to mobile to run on things like the LiveG Prism smartphone, of course. But we can do that, not too bad. I mean, the web is somewhat hackable, so it's possible, which is good. It's a shame currently that other operating systems don't embrace progressive web apps as much as they should be, really. When you look at Apple, for example, their platform is very much locked down, on iOS especially, because all web browsers made by third parties must use Apple's own WebKit web rendering engine, so they're not allowed to use their own browser engines if they want to have a fighting chance of getting onto the App Store, basically, which is a shame. And the unfortunate thing about WebKit is that it really does significantly limit the usefulness of progressive web apps. I mean, sure, you can install progressive web apps onto an iOS device, but there's a lot of missing functionality, such as web push API and the notifications API as well. So we can't really do the useful things like sending notifications like most apps do on iOS. But hopefully they'll be implementing those kind of things soon. I know that notifications might be implemented in 2023, but we'll see. But big up to the open web advocacy, rather, for trying to push these big tech companies down the right path, basically, because then people will be able to adopt PWAs more freely, and it will get a lot of more interesting developments happening, because there'll be a lower barrier to entry. I mean, especially the barrier to entry on LiveGOS is going to be much lower than existing operating systems right now, and hopefully that will make building apps cross-platform, especially working with LiveGOS, much easier, which will be exciting. So yeah, one day. But we're grateful for a lot of software working as PWAs, especially the big players in technology, for allowing that to happen right now. And hopefully they don't close down their PWA versions. Fingers crossed. Otherwise they'll get some angry users, I'm sure. But yeah, that's it in terms of our agenda. Don't forget that if you have any questions or input, then you're welcome to leave them in the Lookahead channel on Discord, or via the live chat feature of YouTube. So that concludes today's episode of LiveG Lookahead. Our next meeting is scheduled on Tuesday the 29th of November 2022 at 5 PM GMT. You can rewatch this meeting via the recording on our YouTube channel that we made available shortly. But until then, thank you for attending, have a good evening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.